Hi to all. In this video, we will calculate briefly the price and the value of an equity swap. Surprisingly, it's going to be rather straightforward and simple because it is calculated exactly in the same way as an interest rate swap. So the first step is we just need to add all of these present value factors, and then we just use the same formula we have used before, which is 1 minus the terminal present value divided by the sum of all the present values, and that is the price of the equity swap. So now, what is the value of an equity swap, right? So let's keep in mind that in an equity swap, we have two investors, and one of the investors after the swap will be receiving these floating rates that are the result of this equity portfolio, whereas the other investor will receive a fixed rate that we just calculated right here. So then, in theory, at initiation, there should be a fixed rate because the two things are swapped. It means the two things should be worth the same because they're both simply swapped. So this fixed rate should be comparable to what we are expecting to receive from the floating component from the equity side. And therefore, how do we can look at this in the following way. Number one, equity at end of period or year, or closing price of equity divided by beginning price of equity. If we do this calculation, this is going to give us something like 1.05 if the returns are 5%, or 1.10 if the returns are 10%, right? And now this is very easy to compare with the price of a bond that we were looking at before that was trading at par. If the bond is trading at par, then the price of this bond is simply, and the face value is 1, the price of the bond is the same as the face value, and if we consider a bond with a $1 face value, then the price will also be 1. So how do we get, let me move this down here, the price of a bond? We do this in detail when we are looking at the interest rate swaps, and this is a very simplified way of seeing things. We have a fixed coupon rate multiplied by the sum of present value factors plus present value terminal. Okay, in a bond that is trading at par and the face value is $1, this should be equal to 1. Okay, so now what we're going to do, if we're swapping this bond, and we're swapping, or in other words, this fixed rate, and we're swapping it for an equity floating rate, in this case, then what we will assume is that both things need to be the same so that it makes sense to both investors to go ahead and swap. So what we are saying basically is that I'm just going to copy this here. This should be equal to this. And finally, then if we want to find out the value of a swap, if a swap has a value, it means that this equality is no longer holding. This is not true. It's not equal. And if it's not equal, then we can find the value of the swap just by subtracting this equity minus this value of the fixed return, of the fixed rate. And once we get that, that will give us the value of a bond. Now, one important thing, if we are subtracting this whole thing, then we're also subtracting this last. So that is basically the formula for this value of a swap, and I will copy it a little bit more formal. So value of a swap is equal to the equity index today minus equity index in the beginning period of the period minus the fixed rate multiplied by the sum of the present value factors and then minus the present value of the terminal of the last of the years when the swap will end. Now there is this little adjustment, which is multiply the fixed rate by the number of days divided by 360 here, because it is on a yearly basis. We don't need this adjustment, so we can ignore this adjustment, and this is simply fixed rate times this sum if interval. Well, let's keep this previous formulation, and then the only thing that will happen is that when you substitute this by 360 divided by 360, this is going to become 1, right? So then it will be relevant, and you can even remove it. But we can only do that if these intervals are yearly. If the intervals are less than a year or different from a year, then we cannot do that anymore. So let's instead keep this, because it may be useful later on. So if we're working on the value of this swap right here, right, what we will do is follow this formula we have either here in a lot of detail, or that we have here already in a more concise expression. So it's just equity at index today, and let's read the problem is giving us that equity index today, equity is trading at 105, right? And then updated fixed rate is 1.2. I'm just reading the information that is given in the question. And then interest rates dropped today to 1.2%, yes, and equity is 105, okay? So now we have this too. So equity swap value would be simply equity index today divided by equity index at the beginning of the period, which was 100. So this is just telling us that we got a 5% return. And that 5% return, if it is equal to the fixed rate we have for this swap, then the value would be 0. But I am assuming it's likely higher than that fixed rate we had calculated for this swap. So let's check then what the value is, and for that purpose we just subtract this fixed rate, and that is the fixed rate at initiation, which is 1.5, multiplied by the sum of the present value factors, and then we're going to subtract as well the present value of the terminal year, which is this one. Okay, and there we go. So now we have this equity swap value, and this is basically stated on a dollar, because we are only considering, we're not considering the notional amount. So then we need to multiply all of this by the notional amount, which is here. And then once we're done with that, and let me escape, because so what we do is we add a parenthesis here and in the end, and now we can multiply by the notional amount. So once we do that, then we end up with this amount, which is 141,988. And there we go. So we are basically done with our problem. This is the equity swap value, and that's how we can calculate it. But let's keep in mind that the price is much simpler to calculate, because we can calculate it just the same way we were calculating the price of an interest rate swap. I hope this was helpful, and thank you so much for your attention once again.